construction programming. Programming here does not represent computer programming, but in terms of you can talk about in terms of planning, and you can even call planning and scheduling, and call scheduling, right? So this comes under programming, and you can probably categorize that into different ways. Like you can subcategorize that in terms of preliminary, then you can put that under intermediate, then you can put this is very important, it's called detailed or final. And then many people think this is the final level, but it's not so. It is something called as built. And after construction. So programming, like if you want to take up a project, construction project, like you will do a preliminary stuff and intermediate stuff and detailed stuff and as built and after construction. So what are these things? Like say for example, preliminary planning or preliminary estimate, right? So where do we get the details? Like for example, if you are pretty new to this business and you got a project to construct in a particular place, say for example, Chennai, right? So people who know about Chennai or who lived in Chennai know about the nuances or the characteristics feature of this particular city. But if you're pretty new, you've moved from some place, or your construction company is in different location and you have not pretty familiar with this particular place, first you will do a preliminary estimate, right? So what you wanted to do, right? So you will be categorize that based on the existing details. So that's the preliminary data. Here data in the sense, generally in construction we call data as a knowledge, right? So that's why the experienced construction personals gets paid more than the freshers, right? So it's all about knowledge, right? So what do you know about Chennai? You can probably technically call that as 13° north. Can probably call this 13° north, right? And you just go to a Google and you can do a Google Earth or something like that, and you know about that particular feature. And then you talk about the government, um about government, TN government. Then you talk about the authority that develops the lands and buildings. So you can do about you can learn about CMDA, which is Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority, right? So you know these things. So this is a preliminary estimate. Like given a project in a particular location, first you understand about the location, and then you do a basic Google search or get reference from the experts in that particular field in who have done the project in that location or something like that. So that's all preliminary estimate. That will give you roughly, say for example, the square feet. Say the square feet cost, say a place in Chennai called, you can even say Kelambakam, right? So it per square feet, the cost ranges from probably 2,600 to 4,000 a maximum, right? So if you want to construct an apartment here, so this will be your basic estimate, right? So what happens if you give 9,000 a square feet and a 6,000 a square feet? Nobody's going to buy that, your project, right? So as simple as that. So preliminary details and something like that, right? This is pretty much useful in creating the conceptual boundary. Like this is very important. We'll be discussing this when we do earned value management. So conceptual boundary, or can even call framework, conceptual framework about the intended location and the corresponding requirements, right? Next is the intermediate stuff. So once we do a preliminary estimate, so we have a fair amount of idea about what we can do. Next, we'll be looking into the intermediate estimate. So this will be, as the name suggests, it will be intermediate between preliminary and detailed. So preliminary is rough estimate, can note down as the rough estimate, but generally in construction it's not rough estimate, will appropriate estimate. Even the term estimate itself is appropriate only, approximate. Why? So rough estimate is something like an approximate estimate. Why? Intermediate estimators will go something more in detail, like so what type of structure they use. They use RCC, or what happens if there is any precast yard nearby, so that we can go for precast construction. Or what will be the the RMC plants nearby for concreting. And the more important thing is quarry or aggregates section, right? So where you get that M sand or aggregates or something like that. So this is a very important thing. So even though it's an intermediate estimate, it is something like a connection between rough estimate and a very detailed estimate, right? So this is a very important term. Generally, these are generally ignored in the small scale construction. That is why they face huge problem during construction. So this is a very important step. And in fact, bigger companies like L&T and all, they play very crucial role here, because they not only do estimation of the materials but also the manpower. Generally, it's, you can put everything under as resources. This is where you do resources. Like for example, if you don't plan this and finally you get the project, and if you want to quote for a budget, then if you understand that there isn't any manpower available nearby, so that will be a detrimental. So you have to hire from some place, and you have to transport them, and you have to give permanent accommodation at that location. So when you finally look into the detailed estimate, then that will be a negative thing to the contractor. So they generally incur loss, because that's, they have not done the intermediate estimate properly, right? So all those things, all the resources, how you manage them, all those matters, right? And very important thing that we will be discussing probably in Thursday's class is crew balance. And there's something called crew balance chart, right? So we'll be discussing that. It's a real-time estimate. For example, um, say for example, there is a probability associated with any activity. Given a task, say for example, we have a class of 25 students, and I give assignment, and probably all of you when do not start immediately. Say 1% of students starts immediately when the assignment is posted, and then they continue work every day, they do something. But some people who start in mid of the assignment deadline, and then they could able to do something. And some people, they call, generally it's a student syndrome, where they start only the day of the deadline, right? So they try that, for them it will be highly stressful, and then they look into other options like malpractice and all, right? They get things from, then that's why they get very lower grade. And finally, when the grade sheets have come, then they realize that they think that they could have done the assignments in good style or something like that, right? So as simple as that. So those things are intermediate planning. So you don't have a exact outcome at that stage, but that will be detrimental to the final thing, right? As simple as that, right? And then that's what we call a crew balance chart. Like, so we will mimic, or we will simulate the work nature, and then we'll see, we'll take an average value, like how much money required, or the time required, or even people, how many people is required for the particular task or something like that. So that's what we call a crew balance chart. I'll explain you with an example in Thursday's lecture, right? So those are comes under intermediate estimates. So those are important, but you should not overlook that, you should not compromise this, like, so this is also very important. Even though it's an intermediate estimate, so it should be given a fairly good amount of analogy on it, like something like you need to really look into that in much detail, right? Then detailed estimate is the final estimate. It is the actual estimate, or actual thing that goes to the office or that goes to the management for approval. Or if it is a contract, then it goes to, the bidding. So this is the estimate that goes to the bidding. So no more changes or alteration can be done once you finalize or freeze this. So this is typically the detail of final estimate, right? So in many textbooks, they describe the first three in a greater sense. They look into that in much detail, but these two things are always ignored in probably in Indian context or Indian textbooks. But as built, right? The name as built is that there is a term that you should know nowadays is very popular called constructability, right? So this is a term, or if you go to United Kingdom and the surrounding region, they call that as buildability, right? So this is a very important thing. As built is the term is like during construction stage. Like once told in detail estimate, the changes is after that the changes is not allowed, right? But what happens if there is some unforeseen circumstances? The price of a particular construction material goes up. So what is the situation for the construction happening at that point of time? So the contractor cannot take up the burden because, say, for example, if it is a multi-crore project, then the contractor will become insolvent because of the drastic unforeseen circumstances or change in the price or escalation in the price or something like that. But in that case, what they do is they check the detailed estimate and the time frame. Right. Say, for example, if I give the detailed estimate in 2021, say May, but the project starts only at 2022 Feb, then probably you can see there's a huge time delay. By then, anything can happen. The change of government or the price structure or yearly price variation with the inflation and something like that, right? So in that case, they will always map that with as built. At that present, what is the rate? If it is not deviating much, then the contractor issue generally a request for change orders. If the variation is not much, contractors can have a change order. That's a clause in contract. So the contractor can, to protect the contractors from insolvent or becoming, vulnerable to the price change, they will generally ask for change orders. And client, most of the cases, the client agrees because it's the even though if the client sues the contractor, if they hire the other contractor, the price is gonna be the same, right? So they cannot have meaningful unjustification, right? So right, so that's why like they generally given a chance. But if it is very drastic, then they'll form a committee to understand whether that actually happens or not. Then they issue the change orders, or if the client says that it's the contractor's purview, then the contractor has to take up that, right? So all these things are done as built, not during detailed estimate, during the construction. That is what it is called, as built estimate, right? It will not be an estimate anymore. It will be just an as built contingency or something like that, right? So that's a very important thing that you should know. Even construction drawings have to follow these norms, like preliminary drawings, intermediate drawings, and detailed drawings, and as-built drawings. In fact, that's very important. That's where the term constructability has comes in. Like for example, if you take a floor plan, approved floor plan, and during construction, the construction engineer may find something pretty, difficult to do, or it needs some alteration or something. So he does that during the construction with the permission of the client and the engineer, other subordinates, as well as higher authority. In that case, they have to replicate that in the approved drawing. So that's what we call as-built drawing. So as-built drawings are generally used for emergency purposes. In case of fire, so they don't look into the drawing that they prepare during construction. I mean, not during construction, prior to the construction, for the construction of that building, but instead they prepare diagram once the construction is over, or during the construction. So it's kind of a as-built drawings, right? Those practices are not pretty common in our country, but that's very important that you should know, right? The next is the after construction. So that's the final drawing. Like after that, it's actually no more alteration possible because the building itself is done, right? The project is done, right? So that's the after construction that we generally call as bookkeeping, right? So finally, they call that as a bookkeeping. This is a term they borrowed from accounting, when which it's a registry of the processes starting from estimate and intermediate estimate and detailed estimate and as-built estimate, and this will become the knowledge database. The reason is that people might migrate from one company to the other, and there are a lot of attrition happens in a company. So if a person works in a company for more than 40 years, you'll have a better knowledge of what the company's perspective is and what are the projects they do. He has a huge knowledge on that particular thing, right? But what happens if he retire, or if he moves to another company, right? So the particular knowledge also goes with them. So in order to avoid those, they create books. They call generally is a book or bookkeeping. It is the every projects whatever happened for that project, no, they will record that in a form of a documentation, and that will serve as the knowledge base for the people who join pretty new or the subordinates. Like for example, if the experienced person moves out of a company, so his knowledge will also go out in the traditional way, but in an bookkeeping way, it will be recorded in that, so that even if a new person joins the company, wants to know about what are the things that does not goes pretty good for the past 10 years, they can refer it from the bookkeeping. And new person might have a new insight as well as new solutions for the existing problem, so he or she can perform that particular thing. So that is why after construction is also a pretty important thing. So this is how generally the construction programming happens, like planning and scheduling. And this is also can be looked upon in other perspective called controlling. We'll be looking into the earned value management, like so we'll be taking a look at that in much detail, right? So in another subsequent lectures, it's a very important thing, which is like it just tells you how your schedule varies with actual. Not only that schedule, it also looks into the cost variances, like how cost gets varied, right? Something during construction. So this is construction and control mechanism, or simply monitoring. So it's actually monitoring and control. Right. So that's typically the earned value management, right? So we'll be taking a look at that in much detail in the subsequent lectures. Probably in module number 4, when we talk about projects, we'll be looking into that in much detail, right? So understand this is very important, right? So far, we talked about the construction programming that includes planning, scheduling, controlling, even monitoring and controlling, right? Next, we'll be looking into the actual, uh, project delivery, right? Project delivery. First and foremost is the traditional project delivery that looks into design and construction, right? So take a look at this thing. So traditional project delivery that borrows the idea from the classical construction projects, like they design in a company, and also that particular company constructs, or it'll be outsourced, something like that, right? And then later on, people talked about contract design, I mean design, construction and contract, or something like that, or generally it is something called as engineering contract construction. So they bring in design in engineering, and then they do contracting and construction, right? So generally it is ECC. That is why if you go to L&T, they have got L&T ECC, right? So ECC means this. They do all these things. And this is also known as turnkey projects, right? So this is also known as turnkey project, which means that take a look at you buy an apartment, right? So you have to go and visit the particular company office. Then you get the preliminary flow data and you visit the office. Then you talk about the budget or the cost of that. Then you go to the site actually and see whether you like it in the real time. Then you go for advancing. Then if you are looking into the home loan, then finally, once that is done, registration of your apartment. And finally, they'll give your keys for your apartment, right? So provided they finish all the construction and interiors of your apartment, right? So once you're given a key, you'll just put it, no, turn the key to open the door, right? So that's the final stage, right? So that's why they refer this as turnkey projects, right? So this is a traditional one, the additional project delivery. The next is called joint ventures. Two or more companies can join together to accomplish the bigger level projects. Like say for example, L&T is good in construction. They do a lot of construction projects in our country, and still they are probably the premium construction companies in our country. And say, for example, Formwork Systems or temporary structures, right? So earlier there was a company called Doka. It's a German company, Austrian company to be more specific. They do Formwork Systems. They do temporary structures. They even do robotic formworks like climbing formwork and all, right? So they joined together with L&T and they did most of the construction jobs in our country. It is kind of an complex thing, right? So Pioneer Construction Company versus the Formwork Company joined together to do a lot of wonderful projects like nuclear power plant construction and skyscrapers and so on, right? So that is kind of a joint ventures, like, so to enhance the realm of a company, they can join with a company who's pioneer in that particular field or something like that, right? So Doka is good in making the slip forms. So most of the L&T projects which required slip form, they were done by Doka with the help of the Doka or something. It's a joint venture or something. And L&T also have a tie-up with another, had a tie-up with another company called Rambol. So that is what earlier they called L&T Rambol. But now I think they have got separated. So those are examples of joint ventures and something like that, right? So this is a typical example of different project deliveries or something like that. But now generally it is called construction mm, management delivery. It's construction management delivery, right? So this includes almost everything. Not only design, prior to that is programming. That includes all those things like preliminary, intermediate, detail, and something like programming. Then design. That includes preliminary design, intermediate design, detailed design, and so on, right? And construction. Now people put contracting in construction also. So they say PDC, right? And construction management delivery. And then I would like you to search this term called integrated project delivery, right? So maybe in the next class, you can try in Google. So you should know as a civil engineer now, IPD, right? So integrated project delivery. So we'll discuss that in next class anyway, but just do a Google search or something like that. That will be a very important that you should really know in terms of project delivery, right? So these are the things that you should know about construction project management. Next, a pretty much important thing, all these things is you can put under knowledge management. So you can put under knowledge management. Um, we talk about nowadays we talk about data engineering, right? So this is a pretty new term, data engineering or data. You can even call them not in terms of engineering called analytics and something like that. So all those things are typically the knowledge management, right? Knowledge management, which is a pretty much important term. Even though data analytics or engineering pretty new field, knowledge management is pretty old field, and most of the construction projects are done using knowledge management terminologies. Like all these things are like or knowledge, this final bookkeeping, no? So all these things can be put under the knowledge. So that's how it is done, right? So that's pretty much an important thing that you should know about preliminary estimate and detailed estimate. And then you should know about project delivery mechanism. And then the final portion of today is the estimate or type of estimate. Estimate. Um, we even gave you a quick overview of this called preliminary and detail. So that's a type of estimate. And there are other estimates called supplementary estimate. Say, for example, you don't receive clarity details from the client about the nature of the project. And finally, you will start constructing it. And you understand that at one particular season, there'll be a huge fog that could, collapse the structure or the workability, or I mean the working nature of that particular location is not possible, or during storms or unexpected storms can provide a stoppage to the progress of the work, or not only that, it will be detrimental to the built structure, right? Something like that, or built component at that point of time. One example I can tell you is that a lot of construction happened during the Varda flood. I mean Varda storm during 2015 stages, right? So in that case, a lot of construction happened in OMR. They didn't expect that the storm would be very heavy with a high intensity. They ever start constructing it, and once the Varda and the alarm goes on, they stop the work for 1 or 2 days. But when they resume their work, they found that most of the columns they constructed prior to that is kind of failed. They got tilted or buckled, or even most of them got collapsed. So that's unexpected thing. That's an act of God, right? So they generally refer that to be act of God. So in that case, they need additional components and additional materials and labors and time, right? So they generally don't have to really revise the exact schedule they submitted or estimate they are submitted. In that, they can go for supplementary, right? Something like that. Or sometimes there'll be a shortage of, the aggregates, the fine aggregates of the river sand. They can generally go for the alternate materials like the M sand and something like that, right? So in that case, the contractor can request the client for the supplementary, right? So sometimes something can be very higher, like the cement they quoted in the original estimate, and then there is a hike in the cement price because not only in a particular brand, in throughout a country and throughout all the brands, then that has to be accommodated, and that we can done in a supplementary schedule, right? And then very important thing is the nature of contract estimate, or this is pretty much called the contracts scope of work, right? So this is very important. If a given an contract to a general contractor, and he can outsource it to various people, right? So among the subcontractors, the general contractor will generally have a estimate, like he has some 5 to 6 subcontractors. He can even call this as vendor, something like contractors estimate or vendors estimate. So in that case, they can look into the type of estimate they develop, and then finally, if that is within the budget of the subcontractor, I mean the general contractor, the subcontractors are taken, or the vendors are generally taken. So these are the different types of estimate or something estimation, right? And then next we'll move on to different types of this is also different types of estimation. And okay, I think I'll just tell you in brief, right? So in the previous case, we talked about different types of estimation based on the nature of the job, right? So these are the nature of the job or work or even project. And this is the type of estimation based on the method. Um, First is the, generally it is the Centerline method. Next is called a short wall or long wall method. The third and very important thing is the grid method, right? So these are the different types of estimate. Probably they'll give you a brief overview of this when you do a course called estimation or quantity surveying. And these are the different things that generally done, right? So the center line is like the center line of a diagram or the center line of a component is drawn, and based on that the length and other estimations are taken care, like the dimension of that particular structure is taken care, and then it is enhanced in the estimation, right? And short wall and long wall, they have a definite procedure in which the short walls of a particular a floor plan is taken, and then its quantity estimated, and then long wall it's also taken, and its estimates is done, right? You can even call this short wall and or long wall method. And grid method is generally taken as a grid. This is a very effective method in terms of earthwork excavation and all. This is all component specific, whereas this is a planar specific. So this will be generally 2D planar or 2D planar. You can even call it 2D plane, in which the stuffs are drawn in terms of grids or something like that. So I'll explain you with an example. So I'll explain you what is centerline method. I'll just ensure a shape called, say this is something called a wall, right? So if this is the wall, generally it has a center line, so passing through that, right? So half of that will be this side and half of that will be this side, and we know the length is from this point to this point. So based on that we will calculate the length, breadth and width. Also width we know it's based on this, and height or the depth is the height, actual height. If the wall height is 10 feet, then we'll take 10 feet, and if it is like 6 feet, we'll take 6 feet. And for example, if it is a 9-inch wall, 4.5 and 4.5 this side inches, so that will give us the center line, right? So long wall and short wall method is that. Same example, I'm going to give you. This is something called long wall, something called a short wall, right? So when you compare to the length, this is small. So the number of long walls and number of short walls are measured separately in the entire floor plan, and then it is given something like that, right? So grid method is very important. In fact, that I will probably use in Autodesk Revit most of the time to create buildings. Okay, I'll just show you what does that mean. Grid lines are like the number of lines, say irrespective of that. That'll be useful for me to draw a perfect floor plan and horizontal grids. And this is a node. The intersection of the grids is called nodes, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this shape. Say, for example, I have a wall here, and you can note down this the short wall, and then probably a long wall, and then you can provide something like this. This also comes in a long wall. You can have long wall category 1, category 2, and something like that. And I can go with some arcs, probably the arc, something like that. I think not this one. Yeah, like this. And then something like this, and you can put something like this. Right, so this is typically, say for example, this is typically a floor plan, something like that, right? Right, this is typically a floor plan. So if I want to do estimate of this, is fairly good because general known geometry, but this is an arc, so I need some help from mensuration for the the area, then you cut area and something like that. And this also pretty much trapezium kind of thing. Then probably this thing is all square blocks and something like that. So if this is earthwork, I know this particular thing is all pretty much same. Like for example, from here to here, from here to here and here, I can get an area. And also I can get a clear area from this thing. Right. This is where a problem happens. I need to use calculus to get that or something that the areas or something like that. And then this also trapezium and trapezoidal areas. We can get from, we have the formulas to find out the area of this and something like that. So that's very important thing called grid method. So this will be very important thing for, say for example, if the grid lines is not drawn, like say I delete all the grid lines. I delete all the grid lines. Say I just have deleted the first thing else. If I delete all the grid lines, you see the finding the derivative or the area is pretty much difficult, right? So nowadays people use computers, like computers GIS can give you a perfect thing, but this is pretty much a manual computation. Say a manual computation of the grid area of this particular region is pretty complex, right? So in that case, grid lines will give you more accurate or appropriate values or something, right? So these are the different types of estimation based on the methods. And right. Uh, the next lecture will be looking into the construction safety and its procedure or the compliances and what happens if it is violated, right? So this comes to end of today's lecture.